first thing the Persian scouts noticed in 480 BCE was not the size of the Spartan force. It was the stillness. The earth at Thermopylae, a narrow pass someplace in Greece, did not tremble because of Persian numbers. It trembled because 300 men refused to move. Not statues, not symbols, not cinematic abstractions. Men. Men stood shoulder to shoulder in the narrow throat of Thermopylae, their bodies darkened by years under the Mediterranean sun, muscles drawn tight beneath bronze like ropes pulled to breaking point. These were not ornamental soldiers. These were men sculpted by hunger, cold, pain, and obedience. Their skin bore the unmistakable stamp of a people born and bred in heat. Sun-browned, burnished, hardened, men whose blackness was not costume or metaphor, but consequence. At their center stood King Leonidas, the first of Sparta, born around 540 BCE, son of King Anaxandridas II, raised not in luxury but in agoge, a system so severe it burned weakness out of boys before manhood ever arrived. The uniquely strong black king was already marked for death long before he stepped into the pass. He had survived the agoge, Sparta's merciless state system that seized boys at age 7, shaved their heads, stripped them naked, starved them, beat them, and taught them to steal food only to be punished if caught. Punished, not for theft, but for failure. Plutarch, writing in the 1st century CE, described this system not as training, but as deliberate suffering designed to manufacture endurance. Spartan boys slept on reeds cut from riverbanks, went barefoot year-round, and were taught that silence was strength and pain, a language not worth speaking. By manhood, their bodies were lean slabs of muscle, their minds disciplined into reflexive obedience, their fear burned out of them through repetition. This system did not produce pale men. It produced men adapted to sun, scarcity, and continuous physical exertion, conditions that darkened skin across generations. In 480 BCE, Leonidas had stood before the greatest empire on earth, Achaemenid Persia, ruled by Xerxes I, and did something that empire cannot comprehend. He stood his ground, and he died there, with 300 Spartans fighting not for conquest, but for honor, law, and ancestral obligation. Yet everything modern audiences think they know about these men, their appearance, their origins, their world, has been systematically altered, not accidentally, deliberately. In this video, we are unfolding to you a history long erased from modern-day books about who the real Spartans were and what they looked like. While doing this, we shall be exposing alongside the untruths and deceptions materialized by the West against a race of people they do not want our modern-day world to learn about. A people whose unmatched legacy has been whitewashed to fit into the Western narrative. Before we continue on this eye-opening history, do kind to support our works by hitting the thumbs up button before you, share video with friends and families, and subscribe to stay tuned into the channel for more eye-opening Black histories. Now let us dive into the story, shall we?
To victory! For Sparta!
Sparta was not a white world. Sparta is not the pale, marble-skinned fantasy frozen in modern textbooks and Hollywood screens. When we really talk about Sparta, that is the only Sparta that has ever been in the wandering histories of mankind, there only lived a Sparta of sun-darkened warriors, men hardened by generations of labor, discipline, and war. Their skin glistens black under the Greek sun, their backs carved by training so brutal it erased fear itself. When they advanced, the earth seemed to pull back in submission. And this is precisely where the story begins, at the point they tried to erase. In 480 BCE, at Thermopylae, the Spartans, you were never shown, faced the largest invading force the ancient world had ever known. Xerxes I of Persia, commanding an army Herodotus estimated at over 1 million. Modern scholars had reduced the number but still agree it was overwhelming. The Spartans did not stand alone. They were accompanied by helots, state-owned warriors forced into service, men who trained, fought, bled, and died beside Spartan citizens but were denied honor, citizenship, or memory. These helots, largely from Messenia, were described by ancient writers as physically powerful, dark-skinned, and numerous. Aristotle himself acknowledged a terrifying truth.
The helots are always lying in wait for disaster.
He had said in his book, Politics, in 350 BCE. Ancient Greece was not racially white in the modern sense. The Mediterranean world was a crossroads of Africa, Asia, and Europe, and ancient Greeks themselves described human difference not in race, but in climate, sun exposure, and geography. Modern racial categories do not apply cleanly to antiquity, but this does not mean ancient people were raceless or colorless. Ancient writers describe skin, hair, and physical difference constantly, just not through 19th century European lenses. Herodotus, in his Histories, Book 2 by 440 BCE, described Egyptians and Colchians as black-skinned and woolly-haired. He then made a stunning admission, saying that the Colchians are of Egyptian stock. Now, why does this matter? Because Sparta traced mythological and military connections eastward and southward, not north into Europe. The Dorian Greeks, Sparta's founders, migrated through regions deeply connected to Africa and the Near East around 1100 BCE. Ancient vase paintings, frescoes, and sculptures consistently depict Spartan warriors with dark complexions, tightly curled hair, and broad noses, features later cleaned up in Roman copies and Renaissance reinterpretations. The original pigments, reds, browns, blacks, were scraped off. Literally, Sparta had emerged after the Dorian invasion around 1100 BCE, a violent upheaval that reshaped Greece during the collapse of Mycenaean Greece. These Dorians did not descend from northern Europe, nor did they arrive as a pale European race. They came as sun-adapted, war-trained migrants from the southern Aegean world, deeply connected to Anatolia, the Levant, and North Africa. One of the most fascinating and less-known historical proof that Spartans were black can be found in an ancient letter recorded in the biblical book of 1 Maccabees, chapter 12, verses 20 to 23. In this letter, King Arius of Sparta had written to Onias, the high priest of Israel, saying,
King Arius of Sparta to Onias the high priest, greetings. We have found a document about the Spartans and the Jews, indicating that we are related and that both of our nations are descended from Abraham. Now that we have discovered this, please send us a report about your situation. In reply, we will send you a letter indicating that we are willing to share our possessions, including cattle and property, if you will do the same. We have given orders to our ambassadors to give you a full report about these matters.
This was around 170 to 160 BCE, found in a letter attributed to King Arius I of Sparta, who reigned between 309 to 265 BCE. This was not poetic flattery. It was a diplomatic assertion of kinship. The Israelites, an Afro-Asiatic people repeatedly described in biblical, Egyptian, and Assyrian records as dark-skinned, were not claiming symbolic alliance. They were acknowledging shared ancestral identity. Modern scholars have struggled to dismiss this letter without dismantling the very foundations of classical credibility. Frank M. Snowden Jr., one of the most respected historians of antiquity, demonstrated extensively that Africans were present, visible, and integrated throughout the ancient Mediterranean world. This remarkable declaration, discovered in the biblical book of Maccabees, quietly shattered the racial myth before it could fully harden, as it points to a shared ancestral link between the Spartans and the Jews, rooted in Abrahamic lineage, a lineage tied to the broader Afro-Asiatic world. Since this official Spartan correspondence suggests that Spartans were declared descendants of Abraham, it challenges a whole lot of long-standing Eurocentric portrayals of ancient Sparta and its kings, including Leonidas I. This ancestral connection aligns with growing scholarly discussion about the ethnic diversity of ancient Mediterranean civilizations. The link to Abraham, a figure originating from the ancient Near East, a region deeply connected to Africa both geographically and culturally, opens the door to the indisputable fact which glares down our faces, that Leonidas and the Spartans indeed shared Afro-Asiatic heritage, making their depiction as purely white European questionable at best. Far from myth, this letter offers a historical trace of African and Semitic roots among the Spartan elite, roots that have often been ignored, dismissed, or erased in Western historical narratives. Apart from the biblical reference, historical and geographical evidence also points to the Spartans being part of a broader Afro-Eurasian heritage. Sparta was located in the southern part of Greece in the Mediterranean region, an area known for its warm climate, olive groves, and sun, not for producing blonde-haired, fair-skinned Vikings. As a Mediterranean civilization, the Spartans were deeply connected through trade and cultural exchange with neighboring powers such as the Egyptians, Phoenicians, and Persians. Also known as Lacedaemon, the ancient Greek city-state called Sparta was a warrior society in ancient Greece that reached the height of its power after defeating rival city-state Athens in the Peloponnesian War, 431 to 404 BC. Spartan culture was centered on loyalty to the state and military service. Spartan boys did enter rigorous state-sponsored education, military training, and socialization programs. Known as the Agoga, the system emphasized duty, discipline, and endurance to the utmost. By 800 BCE, Sparta had become a militarized state built on three classes. 1. The Spartans or Spartiates, made up of full citizens, warriors by law. 2. The Perioikoi, made up of free non-citizens, artisans, and traders. 3. The Helots, made up of the enslaved but militarily indispensable. All healthy male Spartan citizens participated in the compulsory state-sponsored education system, the Agoge, which emphasized obedience, endurance, courage, and self-control. Spartan men devoted their lives to military service and lived communally well into adulthood. A Spartan was taught that loyalty to the state came before everything else, including one's family. The Helots, meaning captives, were fellow Greeks, originally from Laconia and Messenia, who had been conquered by the Spartans and turned into slaves. The Spartans' way of life would not have been possible without the Helots, who handled all the day-to-day tasks and unskilled labor required to keep society functioning. They were farmers, domestic servants, nurses, and military attendants. It has been proposed that contempt alone could hardly explain the organized murder of Helots mentioned by several ancient sources. According to Aristotle, every year the Ephors declared war on the Helots, thereby allowing Spartans to kill them without fear of religious pollution. This task was apparently given to the Cryptes, graduates of the difficult Agoge who took part in the Crypteia. This lack of judicial protection is confirmed by Myron of Priene, who mentions killing as a standard mode of regulation of the Helot population. According to a passage in Thucydides, 2,000 Helots were murdered in a carefully staged event in 425 BC or earlier. The Helots were invited by a proclamation to pick out those of their number who claimed to have most distinguished themselves against the enemy in order that they might receive their freedom. The object being to test them, as it was thought that the first to claim their freedom would be the most high-spirited and the most apt to rebel. As many as 2,000 were selected accordingly, who crowned themselves and went round the temples, rejoicing in their new freedom. The Spartans, however, soon afterwards did away with them, and no one ever knew how each of them perished. This is because the ruling elite were terrified of a black military majority realizing its power. Unlike such Greek city-states as Athens, a center for the arts, learning, and philosophy, Sparta was centered on a warrior culture. Male Spartan citizens were allowed only one occupation: soldier. Indoctrination into this lifestyle began early. Spartan boys started their military training at age 7 when they left home and entered the Agoge. The boys lived communally under austere conditions. They were subjected to continual physical competitions, which inevitably involved violence, given meager rations, and expected to become skilled at stealing food, among other survival skills. The teenage boys who demonstrated the most leadership potential were selected for participation in the Crypteia, which acted as a secret police force whose primary goal was to terrorize the general Helot population and murder those who were troublemakers. Around 500 BCE, Sparta had instituted the Crypteia, a secret police force of young Spartan men ordered to roam the countryside at night, assassinating strong or outspoken Helots. In 100 CE, Plutarch had written in his book, Life of Lycurgus,
"They killed just any Helot they encountered on the roads."
This was not discipline. This was racialized terror, centuries before the word race even existed. At age 20, Spartan males became full-time soldiers and remained on active duty until age 60. No one soldier was considered superior to another. Going into battle, a Spartan soldier or hoplite wore a large bronze helmet, breastplate, and ankle guards, and carried a round shield made of bronze and wood, a long spear and sword. The Spartans' constant military drilling and discipline made them skilled at the ancient Greek style of fighting in a phalanx formation. In the phalanx, the army worked as a unit in a close, deep formation and made coordinated mass maneuvers. One of the most significant events that brought Sparta lasting fame was the Battle of Thermopylae, where King Leonidas met his heroic end. It is an interesting phenomenon in the history of warfare how unexpected results have occurred in numerous engagements between unevenly matched opponents on the ancient and modern battlefields. This was especially evident in the Battle of Thermopylae waged between the Greek and Persian forces in the late summer of 480 BCE. This was a historic, memorable, and sad event. From a numerical standpoint, the massive Persian force led by King Xerxes, who invaded Greece, should have easily wiped out the small Greek defense gathered at Thermopylae and continued on to victory against a seemingly inferior and disunited Greece. Instead, the Persians faced a prolonged 3-day battle against the small Greek force led by King Leonidas and his 300 Spartan warriors. The battle may have ended in defeat for the Greeks, yet it failed to crush the Greeks' morale and unity inspired by Leonidas's heroic example, and the Persians were defeated soon after. The Battle of Thermopylae's political origins can be traced back to Xerxes' predecessor Darius I the Great, who sent heralds to Greek cities in 491 BCE in the hopes of persuading them to accept Persian authority. This offended the proud Greeks greatly. The Athenians went so far as to toss the Persian heralds into a pit, while the Spartans followed suit and tossed them into a well. In 480 BCE, Xerxes invaded Greece as a continuation of Darius's original plan. He began the same way his predecessor had. He sent heralds to Greek cities, but he skipped over Athens and Sparta because of their previous responses. Many Greek city-states either joined Xerxes or remained neutral, while Athens and Sparta led the resistance with a number of other city-states behind them. Before invading, Xerxes implored the Spartan king Leonidas to surrender his arms. Leonidas famously replied, "Come and take them." Xerxes intended to do just that and thus moved toward Thermopylae. Xerxes led a vast army overland from the Dardanelles, accompanied by a substantial fleet moving along the coast. His forces quickly seized northern Greece and began moving south. The Greek resistance tried to halt Persian progress on land at the narrow pass of Thermopylae and at sea nearby in the Straits of Artemisium. The Greek army was led by Leonidas, who was estimated to have had around 7,000 men. Xerxes, on the other hand, had anywhere from 1 to 2 million or more soldiers, but modern-day scholars had disagreed on the numbers, but agreed that the population of invading Persians were very overwhelming. Despite the disparity in numbers, the Greeks were able to maintain their position. Their strategy involved holding a line only a few dozen yards long between a steep hillside and the sea. This constricted the battlefield and prevented the Persians from utilizing their vast numbers. For 2 days, the Greeks defended against Persian attacks and suffered light losses as they imposed heavy casualties on the Persian army. Only when the Greeks were betrayed did the battle take a detrimental turn for them. Ephialtes, a Greek citizen desiring reward, informed Xerxes of a path that went around Thermopylae, thus rendering the Greeks' line useless in preventing forward advancement of the Persian army. Xerxes took advantage of this betrayal and sent part of his army along this path, led by Ephialtes himself. After reaching the other side, the Persians attacked and destroyed a portion of the Greek army. This forced Leonidas to call a war council, at which it was decided that retreating was the best option. However, as the majority of the Greek army retreated, Leonidas, his 300 bodyguards, some helots, people enslaved by the Spartans, and 1,100 Boeotians remained behind, supposedly because retreating would defy Spartan law and custom. They held their ground against the Persians, but were quickly defeated by the vast enemy army, and many, if not all, were killed, including Leonidas. News of this defeat reached the troops at Artemisium, and Greek forces there retreated as well. The Persian victory at Thermopylae allowed for Xerxes' passage into southern Greece, which expanded the Persian Empire even further. Leonidas's legacy had survived beyond the battlefield. It endured in the annals of Greek history and in the ideals of courage, discipline, and leadership qualities that define not only the Spartan ethos, but the very spirit of resistance against tyranny. When Xerxes I invaded Greece in 480 BCE, Leonidas led his force north knowing fully well he would not return. Herodotus records that the Spartans were aware of the prophecy foretelling Leonidas's death, yet he chose to stand anyway. When betrayal revealed the mountain path behind Thermopylae, Leonidas dismissed many allies and remained with those prepared to die. The Spartans fought until their spears shattered, then with swords, then with bare hands and teeth. Leonidas fell under a rain of Persian arrows. His body fought over fiercely because even the enemy understood his symbolic weight. This was not the stand of a fictional European archetype. It was the culmination of an Afro-Mediterranean warrior tradition older than classical Greece itself. Today, the Battle of Thermopylae is celebrated as an example of heroic persistence against seemingly impossible odds. Soon after the battle, the Greeks built a stone lion in honor of those who had died and specifically for the fallen King Leonidas. In 1955, a statue of Leonidas was erected by King Paul of Greece in commemoration of his and his troops' bravery. The Battle of Thermopylae also served as the inspiration for the film 300 in 2006. So why were they repainted white? Fast forward. By the 18th and 19th centuries, Europe was building empires on slavery, colonialism, and racial hierarchy. A problem emerged. How do you justify white supremacy when ancient greatness was visibly darker? You rewrite it. Greek statues were stripped of color and presented as white marble. African and Afro-Asiatic features were resculpted. Helots were erased from military narratives. Sparta was rebranded as a proto-European ideal. Johann Joachim Winckelmann, 1717 to 1768, the father of modern art history, openly promoted the idea of Greek whiteness, despite overwhelming archaeological evidence of polychromy. Thus, black Spartans were buried beneath philosophy and plaster. Still, even in erasure, fragments survive. Ancient DNA studies show southern Greek populations carried Mediterranean and North African markers. Classical texts repeatedly describe dark skin as normal. African warriors appear throughout Greek military history, from Egypt to Nubia to Colchis. Sparta was not an anomaly. It was part of a black-brown ancient world that frightened later Europe into silence. Ancient writers never described Spartans as fair or flaxen. They described them as hard, severe, and terrifying. Xenophon, writing in the early 4th century BCE, marveled at their physical conditioning and collective discipline, noting that Spartan bodies looked forged rather than grown. Aristotle, in Politics, 350 BCE, spoke of their relentless training and the permanent tension of a society built for war, where even peace felt like preparation for bloodshed. Although Spartan women were not active in the military, they were educated and enjoyed more status and freedom than other Greek women. Spartan women had a reputation for being independent-minded, and while they played no role in the military, female Spartans often received a formal education, although separate from boys and not at boarding schools. In part to attract mates, females engaged in athletic competitions, including javelin throwing and wrestling, and also sang and danced competitively. As adults, Spartan women were allowed to own and manage property. Additionally, they were typically unencumbered by domestic responsibilities such as cooking, cleaning, and making clothing, tasks which were handled by the Helots. Marriage was important to Spartans as the state put pressure on people to have male children who would grow up to become citizen warriors, and to replace those who died in battle. Men who delayed marriage were publicly shamed, while those who fathered multiple sons could be rewarded. In preparation for marriage, Spartan women had their heads shaved. They kept their hair short after they wed. Married couples typically lived apart, as men under 30 were required to continue residing in communal barracks. In order to see their wives during this time, husbands had to sneak away at night. Sparta did not exist in isolation. From its rise after the Dorian migrations around 1100 BCE, it sat within a Mediterranean world deeply interconnected with North Africa, the Levant, and Anatolia. Trade routes, military exchanges, and population movement flowed constantly between Greece and Africa. Herodotus, writing around 440 BCE, never imagined Greece as racially sealed. He openly described Egyptians as black-skinned and woolly-haired, and traced Greek religious and heroic traditions, especially those connected to Heracles, into Egypt and Libya. Heracles, from whom Spartan kings claimed descent, was repeatedly said to have traveled through Africa, learned from African priests, and drawn strength from lands south of the Aegean. This lineage mattered. Spartan kings were Heraclids, not merely by myth, but by political theology. Their authority rested on ancestry that did not point north to Europe, but south and east into older, darker civilizations. Even Greek art before Roman copying reflected this reality. Early vase paintings from the 6th and 5th centuries BCE show warriors rendered in deep reddish-brown and black pigments with thick limbs, broad noses, and tightly curled hair. These were not symbolic colors. Archaeological pigment analysis conducted in the 20th and 21st centuries most notably on statuary and relief fragments, has confirmed that Greek sculpture was originally painted in lifelike tones, not left white. The whiteness so often associated with Greece is the result of stripped pigment and later aesthetic ideology, not ancient intent. Sparta's social structure reinforces this truth. By 800 BCE, Spartan society rested on the forced labor of the Helots, primarily conquered Messenians after the First Messenian War, which was between 7043 and 724 BCE. There has been controversy since antiquity as to their exact characteristics, such as whether they constituted an ancient Greek tribe, a social class, or both. For example, Critias described Helots as slaves to the utmost, whereas according to Pollux, they occupied a status between free men and slaves. Tied to the land, they primarily worked in agriculture as a majority and economically supported the Spartan citizens. The proportion of Helots in relation to Spartan citizens varied throughout the history of the Spartan state. According to Herodotus, a Greek historian and geographer from the Greek in the 5th century BC, and a later citizen of Thurii in modern Calabria, Italy, there were 7 Helots for each of the 5,000 Spartan soldiers at the time of the Battle of Plataea in 479 BC. Thus, the need to keep the Helot population in check and to prevent rebellion were major concerns of the Spartans. Uprisings and attempts to improve the lot of the Helots did occur, such as the Conspiracy of Cynodon. The Conspiracy of Cynodon was an attempted coup d'etat which took place in Sparta in 399 BC, early in the reign of Eurypontid king Agesilaus II. The leader was Cynodon, who was a trusted member of the king's bodyguard but not a full citizen. The conspiracy aimed to break the power of the Spartan elite and give rights to a broader range of Lacedaemonians. Although elaborately organized, the plot was in the end betrayed to the ephors. They cracked down on the conspirators, and Cynodon himself was punished, possibly executed. Thucydides, writing in the late 5th century BCE, recorded that Sparta lived in constant fear of Helot rebellion. Aristotle confirmed this fear, stating that Helots were treated with exceptional cruelty because they were numerous, strong, and ever-present. These were not weak peasants. They were agricultural laborers, porters, builders, and, critically, military auxiliaries. Plutarch recounts that Helots fought beside Spartans in war, carried their shields, and sometimes bore arms. Yet they were denied honor, denied remembrance, and denied historical presence. The state even instituted the Crypteia around the early 5th century BCE, a secret system in which young Spartan men were sent into the countryside to assassinate strong or outspoken Helots under cover of night. Plutarch described this as an intentional campaign of terror designed to thin their numbers and break their spirit. No society invents such a system unless it fears the physical and numerical dominance of the people it oppresses. These Helots, darker and broader-bodied from generations of agricultural labor under the sun, form the unseen majority of Spartan life. To imagine Sparta as uniformly white while resting on the backs of a darkened population is historically incoherent. The Spartan citizen class itself emerged from this same environment, shaped by the same climate, diet, and intermingling across centuries. Skin does not remain pale under such conditions, not biologically, not historically. In Blacks in Antiquity, 1970, Snowden argued that classical writers were not confused about African presence. They were comfortable with it. It was later Europe that became uncomfortable. As Snowden showed, Greeks and Romans described blackness without the pathological racial obsession that emerged in the modern era. This discomfort had reached its peak in the 18th and 19th centuries when Europe, knee-deep in slavery and colonial conquest, needed a white antiquity to legitimize white supremacy. Scholars like Johann Joachim Winckelmann reimagined Greece as pure, pale, and European, praising white marble while ignoring historical pigment, climate, and text. Statues were cleaned. African features were softened. Textbooks quietly removed Helots from military narratives. Sparta was repackaged as a racial ancestor to Europe rather than a product of the ancient Mediterranean world. The result was not a simple error. It was deliberate whitening. Yet the evidence refuses to die. Archaeology, climate biology, classical literature, and suppressed texts continue to converge on the same conclusion. Sparta was forged in a sun-heavy world of African and Near Eastern proximity. Its people were darkened by environment, intermixture, and labor. Its kings traced lineage into Africa. Its society relied on a darker underclass it feared enough to terrorize. Its greatest hero, Leonidas, died not as a pale abstraction, but as a man of that world. brown-skinned, iron-bodied, and unyielding. Sparta was remembered because it embodied power. It was recolored because power terrified those who came later. And that is why the truth had to be buried beneath marble dust and cinematic myth. Because a black Sparta dismantles the lie that greatness was ever born white. That brings us to the end of yet another eye-opening video segment. Don't forget to support our works by hitting the thumb button before you share video with friends and families to keep spreading our eye-opening black narrative, and subscribe to stay tuned into the channel as we continue to unearth shocking black histories to your notice. We are delighted to have you with us in this journey. Thank you for watching.